Do you have enough space on your computer or whatever?
Yeah, it's recording now. Okay.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, yeah, you can pause for now and then we can start. And you can try using the PowerPoint that you have or seeing if that all works. Can you share it?
Yes, let me try if I can open the PowerPoint. It's actually my first time to use Zoom.
Yeah, I've only started using it recently myself. So,
Mm.
but yeah, if you click the share screen button, then. Yeah, so I can see your PowerPoint now, the first slide. So.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
你再一次。
你唔係早入嚟嘅。
可以，你幫我睇下 O 唔 OK 就可以出嚟噶啦。I'm sorry，我唔係講咗你一次，我會緊張嘅咩？好似 OK 啊，咁樣。
好，開條 link 睇下先。
你頭先話佢睇落嚟 OK 嘅。Okay, awesome. Okay, great. Thank you. Just my friend was worried I cannot use Zoom, so come to help me.
So far, so good.
Great.
Maybe we should give it a couple more minutes in case more people are going to join.
Okay.
Sorry, that's our usual custom, is to start a few minutes after the actual start time. So a few more minutes, perhaps. All right, maybe we should start now, if you like. So I don't know, Max. I don't know if Chris is coming. Oh, sorry, that was a private message. But yeah, I'm not sure. I guess yeah, people may continue to join us. But in the meantime, perhaps we can begin by I'll just briefly say up front that it's my great pleasure to introduce Monica Ding, who is presenting part of her mphil research project, and the title again was Understanding as Construction. So with that, Monica, please take it away.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming today. I'm Monica. So today I'm going to talk about understanding. For many decades, epistemology has focused primarily on propositional knowledge and justification. So some contemporary epistemologists arguing that we miss an important aspect of epistemic activity if we do not also consider the concept of understanding as a central concept in epistemology. So today I will talk about the nature of understanding, based on which I will also argue that understanding is not a type of knowledge. So in our daily life, we have or we are pursuing understanding in different domains. For example, moral understanding, philosophical, aesthetical, scientific, mathematical, linguistic understanding. And we also have some understanding of people, such as people's action, people's emotions and feelings. Different from propositional knowledge, the object of understanding in all these domains are not only proposition of facts, but also some relations between these facts, between the objects, events, concepts, and beliefs. So what is the object of understanding? The word understand has a range of idiomatic uses in everyday speech, including understand that, what, where, when, understand of a sentence, understand how, and understand of an object. Only some of them express the epistemically important state of understanding that I intend to discuss today. So first of all, understand that. I understand that you are leaving tonight. I think it is just an alternative way of saying that I know you will leaving tonight. So in everyday speech, saying that I understand you are leaving tonight may also have some additional emotions, such as that I forgive you that you will leave tonight, so you do not need to worry about it. But I don't think there is any epistemic content more than a piece of knowledge. So understanding that is not the kind of understanding that we are going to talk about today. How about understanding what, when, and where? So in this seminar, I understand when to speak, where to sit, and what to do. I think these are also an alternative way to express a piece of knowledge or knowledge how. So that is not the kind of understanding that we are going to talk about today. As for understanding why, it seems to be a little bit different situations. For example, I understand why the apple falls from the tree. Such an understanding involves propositional knowledge of the fact that the apple falls from the tree, involves knowledge of gravity, and more importantly, the causal relations between gravity and the phenomena. So to achieve such an understanding why, I need to grasp a kind of causal relations. So this is a kind of knowledge that we're going to talk about today. Also, knowledge how is a more complicated situation. There are two kinds of knowledge how. For example, understanding how is a different situation. So there are two kinds of understanding how. Like, I understand how to solve differential equations. It is more relevant to practical concerns than a theoretical one. So maybe understanding how is pretty similar to knowledge how in terms of their practical concerns. As for the different kind of understanding how, I understand how Newton's theory of gravitation explains the phenomena. It is similar to understanding why the apple falls from the tree. It involves a grasp of causal relations between the gravitation and phenomena. As for understanding what a sentence means, I understand what the cat sat on the mat means. Is a grasp of the relation between the sentence the cat sat on the mat and the fact that the cat sat on the mat. So it is a grasp of semantic relations between the sentence and its meanings. Also, we have objectual understanding, including understanding of a phenomena, a concept, or even a whole domain. So understand, for example, understand the concept of knowledge involves me to understand the concept of belief, the concept of justification, the concept of truth, and also grasp of the dependency relations between all these different concepts. So objectual understanding is also a kind of understanding that involves a grasp of relations. To count as understand something, the epistemic agent needs to say how facts are connected together. These connections involve different types of dependency relations, such as causation, necessity, possibility, analogy, semantic relations, normative relations, and so on. For example, understanding that involves a kind of causal relations. I mentioned before that to understand why an apple falls from the tree is to see the causal relation between gravity and the phenomena. Also, in some cases, to understand why something occurs is to see that in some sense it had to occur. For example, I understand that in a class that has 357 students, there must be 2 students have a birthday on the same day, because there is only 365 people, 365 days in a year. So this is a kind of understanding that involves a grasp of necessity. Also, for example, the string theory in physics, string theory is not being proved in practice yet. So understanding the string theory is based on grasping that the theory is a possible interpretation of reality. And we also mentioned that the understanding involves semantic relations between a sentence and the meaning. Also, moral understanding sometimes involves normative relations. I keep saying the word grasp. So what is grasp? By saying that understanding is a grasp of dependency relations rather than merely knowledge of dependency relations, I intend to exclude a specific knowledge of dependency relations that fall short of understanding. So let's see two examples. The first example, imagine a child Mary knows that an apple falling from the tree because of gravity. So she learned this fact from her mother, who is a scholar in physics. Also, as far as Mary knows, her mother never lies to her. Mary has good reasons to believe in her mother's testimony. So Mary is able to tell others that Newton's theory of gravitation explains the phenomena of an apple falling from the tree. But she does not have any further explanation in terms of why gravitation caused the apple to fall, or what would happen if the apple were to fall from a higher or lower height, or if the apple were to fall from a tree on Mars. So she has no idea what Newton's theory of gravitation is. She acquires knowledge of the cause through testimony, but she does not have understanding of the causation. She fails to genuinely grasp the dependency relations. This is a case that one have knowledge without have understanding. And this kind of situation not only happens in children. Imagine a scientist, Kate, observing a chemical reaction. So she knows the whole process of reaction. But before she tries to figure out that the cause of the reaction by herself, she comes to know that it is the introduction of oxygen that caused the chemical reaction because a fellow scientist informs her so. So imagine that Kate is actually very professional. So if she tries to think about the cause by herself, she can actually get it. But she trusts her fellow scientists so much, she does not try to think about why the introduction of oxygen is the cause. So she does not have a sound epistemic grasp of why the cause leads to the effect. So given that Kate gains true information of causation from reliable testimony, she certainly has knowledge of the cause, but she does not understand the chemical reaction. This is another case that one can have knowledge of cause without have understanding. So as the two examples suggest, understanding in terms of a grasp of dependency relations is different from an attitude of epistemic assent to some facts merely through testimony without doing extra cognitive work. So far, we does not have a clear idea of what kind of cognitive relation grasping is, but at least we can see that the notion of grasping is non-testimonial. So the question for now is what grasping amounts to. So clearly the term grasping is merely used as a metaphor, which is not enough to provide a sufficient explanation of the nature of understanding. The problem is for us now is to give a much more clearly account of the kind of distinctive cognitive relations understanding involved. There are two approaches to do this. Firstly, think about the metaphor of grasping. When we speak of grasping something in at least two different ways. For example, when I say that I grasp a mug, it means that I seize it and I possess it. But also, it can also mean that when I grasp a mug, I manipulate it. I own it in the way that I can use a mug to get some water. So there are two approaches to explain the notion of grasping. One is the epistemic achievement account raised by Kevin Wick and Preacher. It explains the distinctive nature of understanding by arguing that understanding has distinctive epistemic values. But I will not talk about this account today here because I think it it has a very good explanation of the distinctive values of understanding, but it fails to give a more specific explanation of the nature of understanding. So today we are only gonna talk about the second way, that is the manipulationist account. So the manipulationist account of understanding is first raised by Grimm. Grimm is inspired by Woodward's manipulability theory of causation and explanation. The basic idea of the manipulability theory of causation is that causation is a device for purpose of manipulation and control. So if the cause is genuinely a cause of the effect, then if I can manipulate the cause in the right way, it should be a way to manipulating or changing the effect E. So for example, gravity is a cause of the apple falling from the tree. So if we change the gravity, for example, we change the gravity on the Earth to the gravity on the Mars, it's a way to manipulating or changing the way the apple falls from the tree. So for us now, it is not necessary for us to agree with the manipulability theory of the nature of causation, but nevertheless, genuinely understanding as a genuinely grasp of dependency relations can be explained in terms of manipulating causal relations. So Grimm's take understanding as a grasp of causations. He explains the notion of grasping in terms of competence in manipulation. For Grimm, to understand is to grasp how different elements obtained in causal relations depend upon one another. And that kind of understanding, that kind of grasping is associated with the competence in manipulation, that is competence in anticipating how changes in one part of the relations will lead or fail to lead to changes in another part. That is competence in answering what if things has been different questions. So the notion of grasping is associated with competence in manipulating causal relations and utilizing it in answering what if things has been different questions. For example, understanding how gravity caused the apple falls from the tree is associated with the competence in answering what if questions such as what if the apple will fall from a higher or lower heat, or what if the apple were to fall from a tree on Mars. Understanding the causation rather than merely having testimonial knowledge of causations enable us to answer these questions. So it actually involves competence in given the effective E, one can give causation C, and give a different effect E, one can give a different but correct causation, and giving a different causation, one can give a correct differently effect. For the manipulationist account, I think it has two problems. The first problem is that Grimm argues that there is no understanding without a grasp of causations. But causal relations, as we have argued before, is not the only kind of dependency relations involved in understanding. As we have discussed, there are also other dependency relations such as necessity, possibility, analogy, semantics, and so on. And I think all these dependency relations are manipulable. Even analogy is manipulable. For example, we have an analogy between the object A and object B. So if there are some changes in A, it gives us some suggestion that the kind of change may also happen in B. It may or may not happen, but it gives us some suggestions. So it means that an analogy is also a kind of dependency relations that can be manipulated. So Grimm responds to this kind of rejection by arguing that what he means by causal relations is actually a very general account. So she said that what she means by causal relations are actually explanatory relations. That is, any kind of dependency relations that can offer explanation are his account of causation. So basically, his modified version is that understanding is a grasp of explanation. But I want to argue that explanation is still not enough for understanding. Consider this example. So in the thought experiment, we drop two masses, one lighter and one heavier, connected with a rope. If we consider them as two masses, the heavier one will slow down for being with the lighter one. If we consider them as one unity, the unity will be faster than the heavier one since it is even heavier. But the unity cannot be both slower and faster at the same time. So the conclusion of this thought experiment is that gravitational acceleration must be independent of mass. The experiment, as Lipton argues, fails to provide a causal or other explanation, but still enable us to understand why acceleration must be independent of mass. So there is no explanation provided in this thought experiment, but the thought experiment still gives us a kind of understanding. It means that there can be understanding without explanation. So as we have argued, the first problem for the manipulationist account is that not causal relations or explanatory relations are not enough for understanding. The second problem is that the competence in answering what-if questions, that is the competence in manipulating causal relations, is neither necessary nor sufficient for understanding. One may answer what-if questions by luck without understanding, or an understander may fail to answer what-if questions because he is interfered by various factors, such as limited background knowledge or limited competence in reasoning. So firstly, think about a student who has really poor problem-solving skills, such as reasoning and prediction. So she grasps how an apple falls from the tree because of gravitation. She sees how cause and effect are related in this case. However, due to her limited competence in reasoning, she may still cannot answer what-if questions in an examination because she cannot use her competence of reasoning in solving new problems. And also for some very complicated problems, such as some understanding of some historical event, to answer what-if questions is also very complicated. Imagine a historian specialized in the French Revolution, has her own interpretation of the relationship between the event and its economical, historical, and cultural context. So her understanding is considered to be objective and reliable by her fellow academics. But if we really ask her, can she answer questions such as whether the revolution would still happen or at least happen less violently if there had been no poor harvest or if the royalty were willing to be more kind to the people? I think even the scholar cannot give a specific answer to these questions. It means that sometimes even we have understandings, it is still very difficult to answer what-if questions. The two problems that we have mentioned in the manipulationist account can actually be fixed. The first part is we can turn causal relations to all kinds of dependency relations. Other kinds of dependency relations are also manipulable and can also be involved in a manipulationist account. The second part is that we can turn competence in manipulation into disposition in manipulation. So though an understander may fail to actually solve what-if problems, she may nonetheless have a disposition in manipulating dependency relations. So the requirement of understanding should not be actually answering what-if questions, but have a disposition in manipulation. So a modified manipulationist account can explain understanding as a grasp of dependency relations based on which one has a disposition in manipulating different types of dependency relations. In this way, the manipulationist explains understanding in terms of a kind of competence associated with understanding, but he does not directly explain the nature of understanding. So the question for now is there a better way to explain understanding? So now I'm gonna talk about my own approach to explain understanding. My approach is inspired by virtuosmology. In virtuosmology, A virtue-based approach to knowledge considers knowledge as true belief succeed because of cognitive competence. So the virtue epistemology discusses knowledge from an agential perspective and take knowledge as a competent performance. It gives us some hints that we can explain epistemic states in terms of cognitive competence that constitute these epistemic states. As for understanding, understanding is also a kind of epistemic achievement succeed because of cognitive competence. To discuss the nature of understanding as distinctive kind of epistemic achievement, we need to discuss what kind of successful cognitive relation it is and how this specific kind of cognitive relations is achieved by cognitive competence. As we have discussed above, understanding is a kind of non-testimonial cognitive relations to dependency relations. So we can explain these distinctive non-testimonial cognitive relations by explaining how cognitive competence achieve it. So only the kind of cognitive competence through which the epistemic agent explores dependency relations can achieve understanding. And I will call this specific cognitive competence as competence in construction. So what is competence in construction? I think it involves the competence in making specific inquiries, choosing the aim or direction of understanding, selecting and arrange relevant facts following specific inquiry, make inference and reasoning on the dependency relations of these facts, relating relevant concepts and belief into a context following the inquiry, making judgment on what kind of dependency relations it is and how to utilize it, making prediction and anticipation on the further development of understanding. And also in some occasions, competence in construction also involves virtuous intellectual character traits such as intellectual courage, creativity, and integrity. For example, I want to understand the relationship between the French Revolution and its economic background. I have a specific inquiry that is a relation between the French Revolution and its economic background. I select and arrange relevant facts. I only select the facts concerning the kind of social environment in the French Revolution. I make inference concerning whether the economical context is a cause of the outbreak of French Revolution. I make some judgment on whether this is a kind of causal relations, and I can also make some predictions, such as I can make an analogy between the French Revolution at that time and some current situations in our society, and I can make some prediction concerning the current society. All these competence in construction help me to achieve my understanding of the French Revolution. So competence in construction enables the epistemic agent to explore dependency relations such as causation, build other type of relations such as analogy, and also intentionally select relevant dependency relations and ignore the irrelevant one. So understanding involves a grasp of coherent and accurate dependency relations that is achieved by the competence of construction. Based on the concept of competence in construction, I want to bring up a virtue-based construction account of understanding. One acquires understanding if and only if 1. Belief involved in understanding are true, and 2. One grasps dependency relations between the relevant facts, which is correct and coherent because of cognitive competence in construction. Condition 1 requires that understanding must be effective, but this is not the point that I'm going to talk about today. Some epistemologists argue that understanding may involve some level of epistemic luck or falsehood, which by construct knowledge does not involve any kinds of falsehood or epistemic luck. And that's their way to draw the distinction between understanding and knowledge. But this is not the point for today's discussion. My main focus is the condition 2, which explains the core part of understanding. The core part understanding is a grasp of dependency relationship that is achieved because of competence in construction. The construction account of understanding explains that understanding is a matter of degree and also has a developing tendency towards a maximal level. So in our daily life, understanding is a matter of degree. We can have minimal understanding. The kind of minimal understanding that I have in mind is the kind of partial understanding that only involves a limited range of facts, or the kind of understanding that barely grasps the dependency relations. For example, I'm cutting onions and I cry. So I know that there's a causal relation between the smell of the onion and me crying, but I'm not a chemistry student, so I cannot really explain what kind of thing that is in the onion that can actually make me cry. But still, I have barely grasped the causal relations between the onion and me crying. This is a kind of like very minimal understanding. And we can also have maximal understanding. One has maximal understanding if and only if belief involves in understanding are true and comprehensive, and one see all the possible dependency relations between different elements in understanding. I want to mention that it is not necessary for all understanding to reach the maximal level, but nevertheless, there is a possibility of development since understanding is a result of competence in construction. Understanding based on the kind of construction account of understanding explains that understanding is an essential process of exploring and pursuing new facts and their dependency relations to reach the level of maximal understanding. It emphasized that epistemic agent has a cognitive control over the content of understanding through their competence of construction. So I'm talking about competence and the manipulationists are talking about competence. Is there any difference? We actually have same intentions, that is to explain the distinctive kind of cognitive relations the understanders have towards dependency relations. We are intend to exclude testimonial knowledge of dependency relations. The kind of epistemic state Mary, a child, has concerning how the apple falling from the tree because of gravity. But the competence in construction is a really different kind of competence from competence in manipulation. Competence in manipulation only refers to the competence in manipulating P that is associated with a grasp of dependency relations. So it relates to the understanding the way that the manipulationist account use the requirement of being able to manipulate dependency relations to examine that the understanders actually genuinely grasp the relations rather than merely knowing it. But in my account, competence in construction is more generally referred to all kinds of cognitive competence that you need to genuinely grasp dependency relations. The competence of manipulation only generates after we have understanding, but the competence in construction is what we use to achieve understanding. So if one's grasp of dependency relations is acquired and succeed because of competence in construction, one has a genuine understanding rather than merely knowing it through testimony. So the manipulationist explains the difference between understanders and non-understanders in terms how the former can utilize understanding in manipulating dependency relations and answering what-if questions, while the latter cannot. But for my virtue-based construction account of understanding, I explains the difference between understanding and testimonial knowledge of dependency relations by pointing out that the former comes from cognitive competence, while the latter comes from things such as testimony. So there are actually 4 advantages on my virtue-based construction account of understanding. The first is it avoids cases where one have knowledge but fall short of understanding. My account explains understanding in terms of how it is achieved by cognitive competence that won't happen in epistemic states fall short of understanding, such as testimony or epistemic luck. And also, because I'm talking about competence that constructs understanding, I will avoid the manipulationist problems, such as manipulationist problems in one may have understanding that, but one still cannot manipulating dependency relations and answering what-if questions. My account also reflects that understanding is a matter of degree. So as a result of cognitive competence, different degrees of understanding has a tendency towards maximal understanding. My account also emphasized that epistemic agents have cognitive control over epistemic activities by exploring and selecting relevant facts, reasoning, and even constructing required dependency relations. By saying exploring dependency relation, I'm talking about explore the kind of relations such as causal relations and the relation of necessity, but we can also construct some relations by ourselves, such as relations of analogy. I'm not saying a metaphysical idea about analogies not exist in reality, but I'm saying that there are so many possible ways to make analogy, but we can construct by ourselves some kind of analogy relations to construct a kind of analogical understanding based on that. So that's basically my account of understanding. The final part of my talk is a question that I believe everyone really wants to ask. That is understanding a type of knowledge? There are two questions to ask. Is understanding propositional, and is understanding a type of non-propositional knowledge? The first one is easier, I guess. Understanding involves a grasp of relations. However, a grasp of relations may be explained. Some people may think that grasp of relations may be explained as a second order propositional knowledge. Understanding in this sense is reducible to a collection of propositional knowledge plus a second order propositional knowledge concerning dependency relations. But I don't think that's a correct explanation of understanding. Before talking about how my account responds to the challenge, I want to talk about the other two approaches. For the epistemic achievement account, it argues that understanding is compatible with epistemic luck or even falsehood. But as I have already said, I will not talk about this account today. For the manipulationist account, they argue that understanding is open-ended. By involving a kind of competence, understanding is open for any new information that one cannot know in advance. With a limited collection of propositional knowledge, one does not know in advance what's the next information or belief. With a competence, understanding involves the possibility of adding any new content. So the understanding is a kind of open-ended epistemic state, while a collection of propositional knowledge is not open-ended, which explains that knowledge is different, understanding is different from knowledge. How about my account? Well, remember that I mentioned that the construction account explains how understanding is a matter of degree. It is a developing process towards a maximal level. So it explains that understanding is not merely a collection of propositional knowledge plus a second order one, because understanding is a developing unity with a tendency to develop itself by receiving new content. A collection of propositional knowledge, by contrast, does not have such a tendency. And there's another reason that understanding is not a kind of knowledge, and also that we should think about understanding as a central concept in epistemology. That is, the primary aim of epistemic activity is the pursuit of truth. While knowledge is mainly concerned with reliability, understanding involves multiple epistemic goods such as simplicity, sensitivity, and fruitfulness. as we all know that the concept of knowledge focusing on reliability. But if the truth is end of epistemic activity, reliability is not the only instrumental value that contribute to the pursuit of truth. Other epistemic goods such as simplicity, truthfulness, and clarity also contribute to the pursuit of truth. For example, for a scientist, scientists also always value simplicity. So if I want to have a theory to explain some phenomena, I not only want to have a true theory, I want the theory to be simple enough to apply to different contexts. I want the theory to be sensitive. I also want the theory to be sensitive to different contexts and different questions. So I also value the sensitivity of my understanding. For humanistic understanding is valuable not only because they are true, they are telling the facts, but also they have to be detailed and fruitful to offer people comprehensive understanding of the situation. So since understanding is an agential construction of truth, it involves multiple epistemic goods. Only when we discuss understanding as a central concept in epistemology can we start to have a more comprehensive explanation of epistemic activities. That's all for today's talk. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you very much. Let's now invite questions from Monica. If you have a question, please just raise your hand in the chat or send me a message. Everyone's fine. Okay, so first question is from Herman.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, thank you for, that was really interesting. I like this topic of understanding a lot. But I'm trying to understand one part of your theory of understanding. So you call it, I think I wrote it down here, it's a developing unity? Is that understanding is a developing unity with a tendency
Yes.
to develop by receiving new content. So I got a little hard time just getting my mind. So maybe I just want some clarification. What does it mean that it is a developing unity with a tendency? Can you say a little bit more?
I think that understanding is a developing unity. It means that we can always use cognitive competence to add new informations into the understanding. So understanding is also can always be developed towards a maximal level of understanding. We can always adding new information and constructing new dependency relationship between based on the original dependency relations. I think that is what I mean by it is developing towards a maximal level.
Well, I think I understood the developing element, but I wasn't quite getting. I'm not sure that I know how to exactly articulate this question, but what is it? Is it a mental state that someone is in? Is it, because when you say it's a unit, is it like a belief state? Is it a state that someone is in at a time that
Yes.
you can sort of track over time and you can identify it as something? Or is it just a cluster of dispositions? Or, sorry, my phone's playing. But yes, can you answer that?
I think understanding is a kind of epistemic state that is achieved by competence. I think similar to knowledge, it is a kind of epistemic state that involves different cognitive relations to the dependency relation. So I think it's a kind of epistemic state. By saying unity, only means that, maybe I should change another word, but by saying unity, I merely means that all these facts are connected together, so that we are grasping the whole dependency relations. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, if that's all, then next is Max, then Jamin. Max, are you there?
Yep. Hello. I'm
Okay.
here. Hi, Monica. Thank you. Thank you very much. I enjoyed that. I'm trying to turn on my camera, even though let me see here. There we go. So you can see me asking my question. Hi. So I had questions both about the claim, I mean, and I wasn't even quite sure whether you were making these, but the claim that that understanding is distinct from knowledge. So that's one thing that I had some questions about, and then also the idea that understanding isn't transmissible by testimony. I mean, I guess firstly, I mean, are you committed to both of those things? Did you say something like, okay? So I guess on the testimony part, I mean, why can't I mean, I would think. I mean, what is it about understanding that makes it non-transmissible by a testimony? I mean, like if I'm a university student, I sign up for some cool philosophy class, and my teacher is a really great philosophy teacher. Can't I come away with an understanding of, I don't know, whatever the topic of the class is, and I mean, is the idea that I've got to now do something myself? So I listened to the testimony of the teacher, and now I've got to do some grasping of my own or something like that. But why can't that also be transmitted by testimony? So that's one question. Then I guess maybe I'll let somebody else ask a question before I come back to the distinctness between knowledge question. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
For the testimonial, for the testimony, I think first of all, I'm only seeing that the grasp of dependency relations is not testimonial, but I can learn other facts through testimony. That's only the dependency relations that cannot be testimony, cannot be testimonial, and the reason is that first of all, I think that if I gain the dependency, if I acquire the dependency relations from a testimony, but I also think about the dependency relations by myself, I think it is still okay to be called as understanding. But if we only get the dependency relations from testimony and we never think about it, I think that is merely knowledge of dependency relations rather than understanding. So if we get a dependency relationship from testimony and we think about, we understand it, and we can, for example, answering to what if questions, I know how the two things are really connected. I think it still counts as understanding.
Yeah, I guess I can't quite get my head around what the missing ingredient is supposed to be. You know, why it is that grasp of these dependence relations are not transmissible via testimony. I mean, even in a case where, you know, I end up knowing something by a testimony, I mean, I've got to like assent to the proposition myself, right? I mean, so it's not as though it's just like being hit on the head and then suddenly I have this testimonial knowledge, right? I mean, I have to believe the thing myself, and right, and it has to satisfy all the other conditions for being an item of testimonial knowledge for me. So again, I guess I'm just puzzled. Like, why can't you transmit the requisite dependency relations so that I then have grasp of them, and then that's just a matter of, you know, understanding via testimony.
I think if you transform testimony to your own grasp of dependency relations, that's okay. I mean, it can be counted as understanding. By saying that understanding is non-testimonial, I merely want to exclude one situations. That is, I get the grasp of I get the knowledge of dependency relations, but I never think about it. I just know that there is a causal relations, but I does not know the content of the causal relations. That is a kind of case that is not understanding. For example, for a child to know that gravity causes the apple falls from the tree, she merely knows it without being able to explain it. And that's the only kind of situation that I want to exclude from understanding. But if I can transform testimony to a grasp of dependency relations through thinking, I think it is okay.
Yeah, okay. All right. Thanks.
Okay, then we can move on to Jamin and then Rachel.
So I also wanted to ask about the grasping of the dependency relations. And my question is basically, does the grasping of the dependency relations itself involve understanding? So do you need to understand these dependency relations in the right way in order to grasp them? So then the question would be, if they do, if the grasping does require the understanding, does that introduce some kind of circularity or regress into the account? Or on the other hand, if the grasping does not require understanding the relations, I wondered if you could say something as to why you think understanding is not necessary when it comes to the grasping.
Yeah, that's a very good question. For me, I think intuitively, grasping does not require understanding. Like, firstly, I know a variety of facts. Then I grasp their dependency relations, and after that, I can have understanding. But for me, it feels like grasping and understanding happens at the same time. Like, grasping can be another way for us to describe understanding. So grasping is more like a metaphor to describe the kind of cognitive relations we have in understanding. Does it make any sense?
Well, the picture that I was understanding, as I was understanding your view, is if to understand some one thing, X, you have to grasp these dependency relations between X and all these other things. So the dependency relations are themselves more, maybe they're just more facts, more propositions about this depends on this depends on this depends on this. The initial understanding is, how do we understand the first thing, X? And then my question was, well, on your view, to understand X, you have to grasp this kind of relation between X and all these other things, A, B, and C. But then what about the grasping of X and A? Is that itself something that needs to be understood, or is that something that just requires a lesser epistemic status? Like, as long as you know what the dependency relations are, that's enough to understand this thing over here. Does that make the question clearer?
Yeah, I think first of all, grasping the dependency relations between different elements of object. So understanding for example, understanding is a whole domain and it has a lot of elements. And grasping is to grasp the relations between these elements. So understanding involves different kinds of cognitive relations. So it involves kind of knowledge, kind of cognitive relations to different facts. And same time, it involves cognitive relations of grasping, that is grasping of the dependency relations between these facts.
Yeah, maybe just a suggestion might be useful to think about. What exactly do you have in mind by these dependency relations? Is it like a proposition of the form X depends on Y, like boiling point, or whether a substance is boiling depends upon what temperature it's at. Like that's a dependency. I mean, that's a fact that expresses a dependency relation or something like that. So I'm just encouraging you to think about what's the status of these dependency relations. Are they themselves like actual relations, things in the world, or are they propositions that are reporting facts about the world or something like that?
Yeah.
But thanks. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, next we have Rachel.
Hi, Monica, thanks. for a great talk. So I either have like just a small friendly addition to your list that I think was missing, but I might be mistaken. Either that or it might be a substantive question. So I was wondering so you seem to have left off like grounding relations or like supervenience relations, which seemed like a significant omission. And so I thought you should add that to the list. And then I guess if it were going to be a substantive question, I was just going to ask, like, if it was on purpose that you did that, why was it that you did that?
I think I just I haven't thought about the two kinds of relation you mentioned. I think I should add it into the list. Thank you so much.
Okay, you're welcome.
All right. If I may, I'll ask a question, then we can go back to Max and then Jamin in the second round. So maybe, I don't know if this would help, Monica, if this would help you address Max's worries and perhaps some of Jamin's worries. Is it if you were to play up the virtue aspect of your account, or the virtue-based aspect, your virtue-based account of understanding, such that would one emphasize the importance or necessity of being able to do things with this, or that the understanding is constituted by the various actions, constructing activities you mentioned. And there was a list of the various types. I don't know if you can go back to that in the PowerPoint, but the various types of inquiry that one should be able to conduct in having this ability to understand, or like demonstrating your ability, or being able to do all these things. So I think Max was asking, why can't understanding be transmitted by testimony? And presumably one answer on your behalf could be that testimony doesn't give you the ability to do all these things, all these constructive activities, which are what constitute understanding on your account. So maybe that'd be one suggestion, and perhaps you could say a bit more about that. I guess also a question somewhat on those lines as to how the construction account differs from the manipulationist account, because the manipulationist seems to also say that having understanding, it involves being able to do all these different things with your knowledge of dependency relations, vary the dependency relations in counterfactual thinking in order to strengthen your explanation, your understanding of the dependency relations, and explain them further. But you said that the manipulationist account fails or is insufficient because the ability to manipulate these dependency relations is a product of understanding, but it's not what constitutes understanding. And whereas so on your account, you're saying something sort of that seems to me quite similar, but it's supposed to be different. Could you perhaps explain how your account differs, such that on your account, the virtue-based account, your ability or your performance of all these construction activities that constitutes your understanding and is not just a product of the understanding? Perhaps again, the aspect of virtue comes in. Maybe the fact that the manipulationist account is not a virtue-based account is perhaps responsible for this deficiency you find in it. I don't know if that sounds right. If you could say more.
Yes, I think the manipulationist account is not a kind of virtue-based account. It does not explain understanding in terms of what constitute it. So the kind of competence in manipulation is merely a specific kind that is answering to counterfactual situations, and that is not grasping itself. That is the kind of consequence we may have when we grasp the dependency relations. And for my competence construction, basically all kinds of cognitive competencies required in constructing understanding, and it is more generally refers to all kinds of competence that we need to achieve understanding. This kind of competence, we can still use this kind of competence to enlarge understanding after we have a kind of understanding. So, so it's like we use this competence to achieve some level of understanding, and we also keep using the competence to achieve a higher level of understanding. But for the competence in manipulation, it happens after after we have understanding, because it is a competence based on the grasp of dependency relations.
Right. And in the manipulationist account, the grasp itself is not a kind of construction activity, as it were. Would you say that like grasping on your account is just the performance of, or at least disposition to perform all these types of activities of inference, reasoning, selecting relevant facts for an inquiry and so on, making predictions, like that's what the grasp consists in? Or would you still say grasp is something else than these activities?
I would still say that grasping is a kind of, it is metaphor for the kind of cognitive relations we have to dependency relations, but that is a kind of cognitive relations that is achieved by competence in construction, which is similar to how knowledge is achieved by cognitive competence in the original virtuous analogy approach.
Okay, great. All right, so I'll stop there. Max, do you have another question?
Hi. So there was the two questions, and I wanted to ask about your claim that understanding isn't a species of, or doesn't just reduce to knowledge. So that's what I want to ask about. And I mean, so at the beginning of the talk, there were these examples where, so there are cases where you say, oh, well, you know, this person knows something, but clearly they don't understand. But I take it that like those cases you could handle by saying, yeah, but that's just because the understanding involves knowing more. And so it may be that, you know, understanding involves like a lot of different pieces of knowledge that interact in certain ways. And understanding is not, you know, different in some fundamental way from knowledge. And then later at the end of the talk, you had these claims about like, well, understanding is a kind of open-ended thing, and then a collection of propositional knowledge is not an open-ended thing. And well, I mean, why do you say that? I mean, why is a collection of propositional knowledge not an open-ended thing? I mean, maybe I just add to my collection and I have a bigger collection of propositional knowledge, you know, about a particular topic. You know, I understood it before, I understand it better now, but that difference is just a difference in amount of propositional knowledge that I have. You also said something about simplicity, like, so these theoretical virtues, like those are supposed to be features of states of understanding and not states of knowledge. But I can't see, I mean, like in the case of simplicity, couldn't it just be, you know, somebody like me who's inclined towards this view that understanding is just, you know, knowledge differently described, say something like, well, simplicity is just a matter of the content of the relevant bits of knowledge, right? How many entities, right, are implied, the existence of which are implied by those knowledge claims, for example. And so, you know, you can have these theoretical virtues attaching to collections of propositional knowledge, which are just one and the same thing as, you know, an understanding of the relevant subject matter or topic. Sorry, that was kind of long.
Okay, so I will talk about simplicity first.
Okay.
I agree with you that propositional knowledge can also have the epistemic virtue of simplicity, for example. However, my point is not that we cannot discuss simplicity through knowledge, but the concept of knowledge we have in contemporary epistemology is that it is a concept that is built on reliability. So the basic idea of epistemology is always knowledge as justified true belief, and we need to talk about justification, we need to talk about the Gautier cases. So the whole discuss of epistemic activity in current epistemology is only limited, it is mostly limited to the discussion on reliability. So I'm not saying that knowledge cannot express simplicity. I'm saying that the concept of knowledge we have so far in epistemology is mainly concerned with reliability. And I think understanding as a kind of understanding the object of understanding is a domain, is a collection of facts and their dependency relations. It is a more convenient device for us to talk about other epistemic goods such as simplicity and fruitfulness and sensitivity. So I think that to talk about the simplicity of understanding and the simplicity that is expressed in knowledge is different, because when we talk about simplicity in understanding, we are talking about how we construct understanding and relate different facts together. So it's not necessarily different from talking about simplicity in knowledge, but it is a new perspective for us to not only focus on reliability, but also other epistemic good. Because if we start with knowledge, it's very natural for us to just talk about reliability. But if we have a perspective from understanding, it's more easier for us to start considering other epistemic goods.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I don't know. I mean, the emphasis on reliability, I mean, maybe that's just, it's like too much emphasis has been placed on that, and epistemologists should be thinking about other, interesting features of knowledge. I mean, I don't see why that, the emphasis in epistemology is gonna show you that, aha, understanding isn't a species of knowledge. I mean, maybe epistemologists are just focusing on the wrong things. I mean, you yourself are attracted to a kind of epistemology that focuses on things other than merely reliability, right?
Yes. I think the point about epistemic goods is not a reason that definitely convince us that understanding is not a kind of knowledge, but it's more like a suggestion that if we consider understanding as a central concept, then we have more things to discuss in epistemology. Yeah. And for the first question concerning the cases where we have knowledge without have understanding. For example, the case about the children who knows that an apple falls from a tree because of gravity. I don't think that he does not understand it because she lacks more knowledge. But I think that of course, in this situation, she can, at her age, she can never understand why gravity causes the apple falls from tree, because she lacks a lot of background knowledge. But in the second case, where the scientist Kate, she has all the background knowledge. She observed the whole chemical reaction, but only the final stage, that is when she comes to figure out the cause of the chemical reaction, someone else told her that the cause of reaction is oxygen. And when being told so, she never later think about why the cause is the introduction of oxygen. So she knows all the facts and she knows all the dependency relations, but only dependency relations, acquires the dependency relations from testimony. And this kind of situation may not really happen in daily life, but it is kind of example explains what's the difference between testimonial knowledge of dependency relations and a grasp of dependency relations in understanding. It's not because we lack more background knowledge, but it is not because it does not because we does not have background knowledge. It's because that we does not have use our competence to analyze, to think about the dependency relations by ourselves.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I thought about even this example that I wasn't convinced. I mean, I didn't see really a clear difference. I mean, but I don't want to linger too long over it. I mean, just very quickly though, I don't see why, you know, once the scientist, who is it, Kate, once she knows more about the relevant situation, why that isn't then just what it is to understand that, or understand why or how it was oxygen that produced the reaction, right? So that's what I thought the distinctness claim came to, is that understanding is this different thing. It doesn't just reduce to, it isn't just a matter of having some amount of propositional knowledge. And I just am unconvinced by these cases, but I'll stop. Unless you want to, Jamin should ask his next question.
Sure, Jamin, go ahead.
Thanks. Okay, well, one question I like to think about with respect to any kind of view in epistemology is how it deals or how it applies its notion to, say, animals and pre-verbal children. So what I'm wondering is, the way you're thinking about understanding, is it something that your view would predict that very young children or animals can have? And I'm wondering if you think, depending on what you think the answer is, that I'm just wondering if you think that's a plausible consequence for your view. My cards here are basically, I tend to be inclined to attribute epistemic states like knowledge and understanding to animals and pre-verbal children. So I'm wondering if your view would agree with that, and if it doesn't agree with that, if you could say some remarks as to why you don't think it's actually appropriate to think of them as having understanding.
I haven't thought about this before, but I think at least I don't think animals can have understanding, because I think understanding is a consequence of reasoning, especially reasoning and inference and prediction. I think I think sometimes children can have very minimal levels of understanding. For example, in my case, like cutting the onions and I'm crying. I know that cutting onions cause my crying. That can be some kind of very minimal levels of understanding. But I think premature children or animals, if they lack the core part of understanding, that is competency in construction, I don't think they can understand. But
I mean, I would suggest, I would find it implausible if someone thought that animals across the board aren't involved in much reasoning or inference. I think certainly a lot of the smarter animals out there must be doing a lot of inferences, or we can't really explain what it is that they do and how they form societies and do all kinds of things that they end up doing. But I mean, I'm not a developmental psychologist or anything, so I don't have the last word on any of this. But I think it's something at least worthwhile to think about, is, are these the kinds of epistemic virtues associated with understanding something that a nonverbal creature could also attain? So I'll leave it there.
thank you.
All right, Chris has a question. Chris, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So I was wondering about a possible way of answering Max's questions by sort of meeting him in the middle and acknowledging that understanding is, in a sense, it can be mapped onto or made up of lots and lots of knowledge, but that knowledge is you know, as we typically use the word know, it's referring to something other than what you're getting at with understanding. And I think Amit made some very good suggestions about playing up, emphasizing sort of the virtue epistemology aspect of it, and the fact that understanding gives you the ability to do certain sorts of things and refers to a certain sort of systematic competence in some field. So to me, I've read a few drafts of your work, and each time it changed quite a bit. So I never quite knew what questions to raise. And so there's one that I haven't raised all along that I think is pertinent. Now, to me, sort of the paradigmatic example of understanding is language. So you can know that the Chinese word hong refers to red things. And you can know lots of bits about some foreign language, but you don't understand that second language unless you have a certain sort of mastery over a whole system of those words. And you know, I'm taking color words as an example because you have to grasp how the color words relate to each other. You don't understand red unless you understand or know that anything that's red is not green as well in the same place at the same time. And you have to, grasp a bunch of conceptual and inferential relationships between things. And then you need to be able to produce sentences of your own. You need to be able to take in sentences spoken by native speakers and then produce other sentences in response. And I thought that the production aspect of language might turn out to be something of an example of the construction process, process that you're talking about. And so what strikes me about that example, I don't know, do you think this works or not, is that you don't need to draw quite as sharp a distinction between understanding and knowledge as maybe you tried to. Although I'm still trying to understand it better myself. And you can acknowledge Max's point that a lot of what's added when we seem to get understanding seems to be more knowledge. But that what I thought you were getting at is that knowledge refers to the bits. And even if it's meta-knowledge about relations between the bits, it still doesn't seem to be getting at like what you can do in a foreign language when you master all the color words. Does that make any sense? So I'm wondering if you can acknowledge Max's point and say, yes, lots of bits of knowledge go into it, and there is a way of mapping it onto knowledge, but the competence aspect of it, and then maybe you could, yeah, go ahead.
I didn't hear your last sentence because there's something with the connection. Can you repeat?
Yeah, there was a problem with the connection. So that you could acknowledge to Max that the content can largely be mapped onto knowledge claims, but that those knowledge claims never seem to get at the dimension of this the dimension of how this content is used, which you're trying to emphasize, which seems to me to be the point of understanding. It's something you can do with it. So it's not radically different from knowledge, but rather it's sort of something that you can do with knowledge. And that I thought that what Amit was saying was there are other ways to sort of emphasize that and bring it out more, that's what's distinctive of it.
Especially if knowledge itself is a virtue that entails certain abilities, then you could say that, yeah, understanding is made up of bits of knowledge where knowledge, bits of knowledge are very specific abilities, and then combine all those abilities together and you get understanding as one broader ability, perhaps.
Yes, I agree. I agree with the idea.
But I mean, that might give you a way of replying to Max by basically, acknowledging much of what he's saying. But still, still giving you a way to explain how understanding is different from knowledge. It's not reducible to it.
Yes.
All right, we have more time for questions, but no one's in the queue at the moment. Calvin has a question. Go ahead, Calvin.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether it is a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I'm not sure whether it is a question or objection. So, at some point you mentioned that in order to understand something, you need to grasp the dependency relation, and this dependency relation supposedly is about a very holistic verb between many different things related to the object of understanding. So I'm wondering if the dependency relation between your own state of understanding and the target of understanding is a dependency relation that is related to your own understanding. So suppose there's an object of understanding here, and it is related to many different things. And in order to grasp to understand that, you need to grasp the dependency relations between it and many different things. And my question is, are you yourself one of the things which is dependent, or your states of understanding is one of the elements which has a dependency relations with the object of understanding? And whether this dependency relation, if it exists at all, is part of what you need to grasp in order to achieve your understanding. And if that is the case, then it seems like you can improve your state of your understanding by reflexively grasping the dependency relation between your state of understanding and the thing you understand. And then it seems like you can go on and on. You just need to meditate, then you can improve your understanding, but you don't need to really get your hands on these things. So that seems like quite interesting. I'm not sure whether it is absurd at all, or this is something you are committed to, or is there any reason to exclude that kind of dependency relation, such that your account would not commit you to that strange result? So that's the question.
I think that it's not necessary for us to have a second order grasp of dependency relation between understanding and these dependency relations. But I think just I don't see how understanding as epistemic state will have relations to the object of understanding in your question.
So I suppose when you understand something, this epistemic state depends on what the object of understanding is. So you in order to say that you understand something, this state has to be determined by what that thing is. You cannot arbitrarily think about that in whatever way you like. The object of understanding itself constrains what you can think about it, what you can manipulate, how you can manipulate it. And I think that is a kind of dependency relations, and it seems like you are quite open to many kinds of dependency relations in your account. And I'm just wondering if the kind of dependency relation I'm talking about would be included in the kind of understanding of the kind of dependency relations which you are willing to admit to the pool, which can contribute to understanding. So
I think it can be possible in some occasions, like in some kind of understanding, if I want to have a reflective level, or yeah, I think it's possible to involve it in my list of dependency relations. But I think I need to think more about examples about how this kind of dependencies will happen Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
And back to Professor Fraser's previous suggestion, I agree that understanding. So there's a part of in my thesis talking about the epistemic and practical values of understanding that involves a discussion of one more difference between understanding and knowledge is that understanding has extra epistemic and practical values because understanding involves the competence in construction. So it gave us competence to involve more facts, more knowledge, and also give us some guidance on actions. And I think one reason that I think understanding is not a kind of knowledge because I think we also need to take the problem of epistemic luck and factivity into consideration. And in that dimension, like knowledge is not compatible with epistemic luck. But if we have understanding, sometimes even part of the understanding involves some falsehood or environmental epistemic luck. That kind of epistemic still can count as understanding. Is that a better way than the current way of saying that understanding is open-ended, so it is not knowledge? But or maybe I should just give up so insisting that understanding have such a sharp distinction with knowledge.
Can I jump in? I would be curious to hear about those examples. Like, what are those examples? The examples where epistemic luck doesn't prevent understanding but does prevent knowledge. What are the cases that you have in mind?
Let me think. Epistemic luck. So the idea is that epistemic luck involves there are two kinds of epistemic luck. One is one in the get here situation, and the other kind of epistemic luck is environmental epistemic luck. For example, we shoot a target, but I does not know that when I shoot, there's a one that blow it away, and there's another one blow it back. So I hit the target anyway. So this is a kind of environmental luck. But some intuitive claims is that understanding me may involves some facts that is acquired through this kind of environmental luck. But we know something, we understand something, but their environmental luck happens, but we still have understanding in that way. Because like understanding is dependency relations. Like maybe some are I have some justified true beliefs and some beliefs that is not so justified, but they are connected all together, and the whole collection may still count as understanding.
And perhaps maybe if this would help, that if understanding is a virtue, then like the one-off instance of luck may not be sufficient to like you can still have the virtue of understanding, or like the disposition to understand, even if it goes wrong somehow in one instance, right? The disposition is still persisting.
Yes.
Perhaps, if you would. Chris, did you have any response? I think Monica had addressed your previous question. Is Chris still there? Oh, there's Chris.
My main question is, Anna, what's that behind you?
Oh. It's just one of the Zoom backgrounds I use for my Buddhist philosophy class. So this is actually a temple in Honolulu. It's a Korean Buddhist temple, and they have this. It's quite mind-blowing to see in person. And I think it should exist elsewhere, but I've only seen it in this Honolulu temple. There's all these individual stone carvings of meditating monks, and they're all shaven heads, sitting in the same position, but slightly different. And if you go up to them closely, you can notice these very amazing subtleties and difference. So you can almost see the personality of each meditating monk, even though from a distance they all blend into. They all seem to be the same. But, so yeah, just something to amuse myself, to try to find interesting backgrounds before my.
The other thing that impressed me is Monica has obviously really done this webcam thing, right? Because you've got a light on your face, and it really looks good. Yeah, it really looks good.
I can't get my fluorescent lights in my office to be better. Anyway.
So Max starts fiddling with his light.
Yeah.
Yeah. It didn't work.
It's bright enough. Max looks more illuminated.
Still didn't work. Still doesn't look good.
Perhaps since we have a few more minutes, perhaps maybe one tangential question that isn't. I mean, it's related to Monica's talk, but not the specific content of it. But I am interested, just because I had the impression that Monica, you were also working on Chinese philosophy, classical Chinese philosophy, and I wonder if, I don't know in your thesis whether you are involving classical Chinese philosophy anymore or whether that's now fallen by the wayside. But I wonder if you have any brief comments as to how this account of understanding might be applicable to accounts of knowledge in classical Chinese epistemology, if you're interested in that thing still.
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
My thesis is actually talking about both understanding current epistemology and understanding in Xunzi's epistemology.
Okay.
So my idea is that similar to the Western epistemology, where there's knowledge and understanding, like two different levels in classical Chinese philosophy, especially Xunzi, we have knowledge, like knowing Kant and understanding the system of Kant. So the understanding in Xunzi's account is also a higher level of epistemic states that is higher than knowledge. And I think similar to the contemporary discussion, Xunzi's epistemology also talking about like understanding, it's the object of understanding is a system or a relation, some relations, and understanding involves competence in answering what if questions. Like Xunzi also mentions that if we understand the system of Kant's, we can have a higher competence in knowing new Kants and drawing distinctions between new Kants. So it's similarly, Xunzi recognized that understanding gave us some kind of competence. And Xunzi also talking about understanding involves some kind of internal transparency. So in Chinese, we call understanding as Ming. It means brightness. So and similarly, Xunzi believes understanding is kind of mental state that we have an internal transparency of all the Kants and their relations, how they are connected together. And I think the virtue-based account, construction account of understanding is, I'm actually inspired by Xunzi's account of understanding. So Xunzi, similar to virtue epistemology, Xunzi consider knowledge and understanding in terms of a competent performance. Xunzi explains both knowledge and understanding in terms of how they are achieved by competence. So I think borrow Xunzi's idea, I can have a new here my new account of construction account of understanding. And also one more point is that Xunzi also mentions that understanding is a matter of degree. So he has a degree of the ordinary understanding of ordinary people, understanding of a gentleman's understanding and the sage's understanding. For example, a gentleman's understanding, gentleman only has limited competence in answering what if questions, but for the sage has comprehensive understanding and a very skillful and excellent level of competence in drawing, recognizing new Kants and making new Kants and drawing new distinctions. So my new account of understanding is basically inspired by Xunzi's concept.
Cool. Yeah, very cool.
Yeah,
Chris,
maybe you just covered this, but I could just add one quick point to that, which is that of those that different levels of competence and the partial versus more complete understanding and the understanding of the sage. And so a particularly interesting thing about Xunzi's account, I'm not sure how exactly this relates to your idea about construction, right? But Xunzi would say that somebody with a very high degree of understanding is able to take knowledge of cases or of paradigms that they've encountered and then use them to somehow extrapolate or by analogy figure out how to deal with new cases that aren't covered by any of the existing older cases. And for those unfamiliar with Xunzi, the very obvious example that he would give is something like a judge extending, a judge who has precedence in several different sorts of cases that he can refer back to, but is faced with a completely novel case where there are details of the case that really aren't covered by any precedent or by any written law, and then is, has the understanding, as Xunzi would put it, to be able to reach a decision about a new case that is somehow consistent and coherent with these previous cases, even though there hasn't been any previous instruction or model that he can work by. So, well, is that what part of what you're talking about with construction?
Yes, that's what I have in mind. That's exactly what inspired me to explain understanding as a kind of construction, because that's the kind of competence we can have based on understanding.
Cool. All right. Well, that sounds like a very fascinating project, especially the cross-cultural aspect. And I, for one, look forward to seeing the final results of it all. If there are no further questions or comments, then perhaps we can end here. Any other questions or comments, suggestions for Monica? If not, then this seems a good place to end it. So I will just first thank you all for a very constructive discussion, and thank you to Monica for helping us understand the phenomenon of understanding much better. And yeah, a round of virtual applause for Monica.
Thank you so much.
Great. So we have more seminars lined up. I think the next one is October 5th, and that will be one of the jointly held seminars between Lingnan, our department, and apparently also National University of Singapore. The schedule is on the department website, and there'll be reminders sent out in the days before that. In the meantime, have a good weekend, and see you soon.
All right. Thanks, Monica.
Thank you.